Commissioner Muiznieks, thank you so much for this interview. You have watching very closely the refugee crisis and sharply criticized some European government stance on this issue. A few days ago, you urged the Hungarian government to give up to reconsider some anti-immigrant legislative amendments. We are going to take these examples, but Hungary is not the only country considering this kind of measures. So what would be your comment to those who say that by taking these decisions, the Hungarian government is actually acting in the interest of the Hungarian people, taking care of the economy, of the security of the country?
Well, the Hungarian government did a very regrettable thing over the last few months. They spread a lot of xenophobic messages to the public, anti-immigrant messages in the Hungarian language to basically try to turn public opinion against the migrants and refugees. Second, they build a fence. We've seen they are not the first to build a fence. Many countries have built fences. They do not work. If you build a 10-foot fence, a migrant will find a 30-foot ladder. Third, they have not been very welcoming and supportive of the people who have arrived. Basically, so they have been moving on. But Hungary is only the latest frontline country to be affected by a large influx of people. First it was Greece and Italy and Malta, then it was Bulgaria, now it's Hungary. And there will be other countries as well. We should not be surprised by this given the scale of the humanitarian crisis in Syria and elsewhere.
And those ideas that those governments who are considering this kind of measures are actually taking care of the people are legitimate or not?
No, listen, there are many shortcomings in European migration asylum policy, and there are new bad legislative proposals coming up now. Every European country has refugee obligations under the UN Convention, but also under the Council of Europe, under Council of Europe standards, to not push back people in need of protection, to examine their cases on an individual basis, to detain them only as a matter of last resort, to process their asylum claim in an efficient and fair manner. These are common standards that have been basically ignored in a number of different cases, sometimes because of the numbers, sometimes because of bad policy and preparation, and sometimes because of basically xenophobic pressures within governments and political systems.
In an article published by the New York Times in June, you made some recommendations. Share with us.
Well, first of all, we have to keep this in perspective. It is not a crisis in Europe. The crisis is in Syria, the crisis is in Afghanistan, the crisis is in Iraq. The numbers that we are seeing entering Europe are not that big by global standards. And Europe is the richest, most stable continent in the world. So I think it's important to keep it in perspective. Second of all, the problems we're seeing are not new problems. If you talk to the Greeks, if you talk to the Italians, if you talk to the Maltese, they've been confronted with these problems for many years. But there's been a complete lack of solidarity. And now what we're seeing is a European system slowly collapsing. The Dublin returns regime collapsing, and the complete lack of solidarity, which has led to what I hope will be a turning point in European migration asylum policy. I hope that we will see more venues for legal entry into Europe so that people don't feel they have to use the asylum system. I hope that we see a more fair and equitable distribution of migrants. But what we really need is we need minimal standards for integration support across Europe, because any distribution of immigrants will not be sustainable. People will not stay if they do not receive help and support to find their way in society.
It's a different term. You are speaking about immigrants. The usual term is refugees. What's the difference?
Well, there are several different groups of people coming to Europe now. Refugees are in need of protection because they are fleeing conflict or persecution. This is a case with 99% of all Syrians. This is a case with many Iraqis, Afghanis. There are economic migrants who, many from, for example, the Western Balkans, who do not need protection. They are not fleeing conflict or persecution, but they are looking to earn some money, looking for a better life. They are leaving desperation, poverty, corruption, but they might not necessarily be in need of protection. There are certain subcategories that might be, but the vast majority of them are not. So there's a difference, and there's a different legal regime, and countries are entitled to treat different categories of people in different ways.
You made a sharp statement when you say, when you said, and I will quote, the European countries have lost all sense of proportion, meaning?
Meaning, I think we have hysteria over the numbers, which on a global scale are not that big. And in some countries, they haven't even arrived, but the hysteria is already there. So I think that we have to keep in mind that we are a wealthy, stable, democratic continent that prides itself on having assumed very high human rights obligations. Some countries have been under severe strain: Greece, Italy, Hungary, Malta. But the vast majority of European countries have done very little. For example, in terms of resettling people from the Syrian conflict, it's primarily Germany and Sweden in Europe. The vast majority of other European countries have done very little. So I think we have to keep calm. We have to keep calm. We have to look at the current challenges in a broader perspective and realize that there are some countries that are doing a whole lot and other countries that are doing almost nothing.
How do you assess the first emergency rules adopted these days in Strasbourg for distributing asylum seekers in the EU?
Well, I support some kind of an obligatory solidarity mechanism because voluntary mechanisms have failed. There's nobody volunteering to show solidarity with the frontline countries. So we need some kind of an obligatory system. I think it's important to see this not as the end, but as the beginning of a process whereby solidarity should be institutionalized in Europe, because the flows will change. There will be greater numbers in one year, in one part of the year, and smaller numbers in other parts of the year. So I think we have to be flexible. But as I said before, redistribution is will not work unless it's accompanied by other measures, by minimal integration standards and supports for new arrivals, as well as taking into account family ties. If you send somebody to a country where they and their family is living in a country next door, it's clear that they will go to join up with their family. So we have to take these issues into account as well.
You have asked the European Union to overhaul its laws governing asylum and migration. What about the other countries which are not, for instance, members of the EU, but are members of the Council of Europe? I'm speaking about Russia, the former Soviet countries, but also about United States, Canada, and China. Why not?
No, it's clear that the refugee crisis is a global crisis. It's not only a European challenge, and that other countries should step up, especially with regard to Syria and Syrian refugees. There are some countries who have opened their arms. For example, Armenia has received more than 10,000 Armenian Christians who have some kind of family ties or who know the language and so on. And Armenia is a small country that is not among the wealthiest of European countries. I would like to see the countries in the Western Balkans, Russia, other members of the Council of Europe do much more than they've done until now. They've done very little. And by the same token, it's clear that America, Canada, and other countries can do more. America thus far has pledged to resettle 1,500 Syrians. When you realize there are 4 million Syrians who have been displaced outside of Syria, that's a drop in the bucket, and much greater efforts are needed not only by European countries, but by other countries outside of Europe.
My last question, Mr. Commissioner. Refugees from Iraq and Syria, but also from Ukraine, unrest in Turkey and prospects for new refugee waves in this respect. Is there a long-term solution for this?
Well, the long-term solution is to address the root causes of the conflicts, why people are fleeing, through I'm not one to advocate military solutions, but through addressing the root causes of the conflicts and the problems that people are fleeing. Legal venues for people to come and work, short or long term. But it's clear that many of these require political solutions. And there's been, people have not wanted to engage in, for example, Libya or Syria. And now we are paying the price for our lack of engagement until now in terms of the tragedies that we see Syrians experiencing, as well as their arrival into Europe. And it will continue unless we try to address the root causes. Same holds true in Ukraine.
Commissioner Muiznieks, thank you so much for this interview.
Thank you.